When the trial is more important than the person, the meaning of justice is lost.
Your character, the sort that deserves to perish in incarceration, Judge Harold Whitmore declared, his voice echoing through the courthouse chamber as Maya Williams struggled to regain her composure. Maya stood by the defense counsel station in County Gay, her wrists bound before her, her hands shaking so violently the shackles clinked together. Her mouth opened, but for a moment, no sound emerged. Finally, her voice managed to break free. "Your Honor, please," she implored. "I am innocent. I did not commit this act." Whitmore's countenance contorted with disdain. "Innocent? A jury has examined the evidence and deemed you guilty. Do not stand there and insult this court with another fabrication." "It is not a fabrication," Maya asserted, her tremors intensifying. "I was at the library. My student identification was logged. There were individuals who witnessed my presence. Please, you must listen to me." "I have heard enough from individuals like yourself," Whitmore stated as the room fell into silence. Her court-appointed counsel, Leonard Pike, rose to his feet. "Your Honor, Miss Williams has consistently maintained that the prosecution's evidence was insufficient. There were significant issues with the identification process, and the defense would like to request—" "Be seated, Mr. Pike," Whitmore interjected. Pike hesitated before returning to his chair. Whitmore's gaze returned to Maya. "You believed your youth would shield you. You imagined that tears and a satisfactory academic record would cause this court to overlook your true nature." Maya's eyes welled up. "No, sir," she whispered. "I did not perpetrate a robbery. I caused no harm to anyone." Whitmore opened the sentencing dossier and perused it with chilling detachment. "You stand before this court convicted of a grave felony, and yet you persist in portraying yourself as the victim." "I am the victim," Maya blurted out before she could stop herself. Whitmore's head snapped up. "Pardon me?" Maya swallowed convulsively, but did not retract her statement. "I did not do this. No one was willing to examine the evidence that proved it." This altered his demeanor. His stare hardened, becoming intensely personal. "Integrity requires fortitude, self-control, and moral uprightness. You were raised without any of these qualities." Maya met his gaze. Whitmore leaned forward. "And that deficiency did not originate with you. It began with the woman who raised you." Leonard Pike's head shot up. Emily Ross, standing at the prosecution's table, turned fully towards the bench. Whitmore continued. "At some point, your mother failed you. She neglected to instill in you a sense of shame. She failed to teach you the importance of restraint. She failed to instruct you on how to live in accordance with the law rather than above it." Maya's face drained of color. "Don't. A mother's duty is to nurture a daughter fit for a respectable society, not one who ends up in chains, pleading for leniency in my courtroom." "Do not speak of my mother," Maya pleaded, her voice cracking. "Why not?" Whitmore retorted sharply. "She deserves to be discussed. A woman who raises a daughter such as this should be profoundly ashamed to claim her as her child." Maya flinched as if physically struck. Leonard Pike stood once more. "Your Honor, this is entirely inappropriate." Whitmore did not acknowledge him. "Sit down, counselor." Pike reluctantly complied. Maya's face was now wet with tears, her breathing ragged, her entire body visibly trembling. However, when she spoke again, her voice emanated from a place deeper than mere apprehension. "You know nothing about my mother." Whitmore emitted a short, harsh laugh. "I know enough. She failed, and your presence here today serves as testament to that." "No," Maya stated, shaking her head. "My mother taught me to speak the truth. She taught me not to capitulate to individuals simply because they derive pleasure from harming someone weaker than themselves." Whitmore's expression darkened. "My mother did not fail me. You did," Maya declared, her voice now louder, tears streaming down her cheeks. For a single instant, A profound stillness pervaded the courtroom. Then, Whitmore snatched the thick stack of prosecution exhibits from the bench. "What did you say?" he demanded. The bundle struck her upper chest. Maya gasped and stumbled backward. Her shackled hands were unable to maintain her equilibrium. She collided with the edge of the defense table, and a sharp nail tore into her forearm. Blood immediately began to flow. The courtroom erupted. "Your Honor," Emily Ross exclaimed. Leonard Pike lunged to help Maya upright. "She is bleeding." Maya clutched the table's edge, breathing heavily, dazed from the impact. Blood cascaded from the wound and dripped onto the floor amidst the scattered exhibits that had been instrumental in her condemnation. Whitmore remained impassive. He offered no apology. He gazed down at her with the same frigid fury. "Perhaps now you comprehend the consequences of forgetting your station." Emily Ross stared at him, utterly incredulous. Leonard Pike retrieved a handkerchief from his pocket and carefully pressed it against Maya's arm. She winced, but forced herself to stand straight. Her body shook more violently than before. The pain had brought fresh tears to her eyes, but it had not broken her spirit. Whitmore retrieved the sentencing order. "Maya Williams," he pronounced, as if nothing extraordinary had transpired. "This court finds that your conduct, your apparent lack of contrition, and your persistent defiance leave no recourse for leniency." Leonard Pike looked up in alarm. "Your Honor, she requires immediate medical attention. She will receive it while in custody." Maya lifted her head. Blood now stained the side of her sleeve. Her face had turned ashen, but her eyes remained fixed upon him. Whitmore continued, his words each one clean and brutal. "This court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The pronouncement struck with immense force. Maya briefly ceased to breathe. Whitmore proceeded. "Furthermore, the court levies the maximum statutory fines, full court costs, and every post-judgment fee permitted by law." "My family cannot afford that," Maya whispered faintly. Whitmore's lips tightened into a grim line. "Then your mother can spend the remainder of her life contemplating precisely what she has brought into existence." Leonard Pike closed his eyes. In the viewing gallery, a hushed voice murmured, "Lord have mercy." Maya stood there, bleeding, trembling, and newly condemned to a lifetime behind bars for an offense she had not committed. She surveyed the documents scattered on the floor, the crimson stain on her sleeve, the man on the bench who had so callously stripped the law of its pretense. Then, she looked back up at him, and in that instant, everyone present in the courtroom understood the same profound truth. This was no longer a judicial sentence. It was a public act of obliteration. Leonard Pike applied greater pressure with his handkerchief to Maya's forearm as the deputies approached. "Easy," he murmured. "Easy, Maya." She barely registered his words. She was still grappling with the incomprehensible reality of life without parole. The words felt unreal, hanging suspended above the sharp pain in her arm, the blood seeping through her garment, the ringing in her ears. Her knees threatened to give way once more, but she braced them, forcing herself to remain upright. Judge Harold Whitmore was already gathering his papers as if he had just concluded a routine afternoon hearing. "To the custody of the United States Marshals," he stated flatly. "Remove her." Emily Ross stepped forward before she could restrain herself. "Your Honor, the defendant is injured." Whitmore did not acknowledge her. "Medical staff can attend to her downstairs." Emily's jaw clenched. "She is bleeding because of what transpired in your courtroom." Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Miss Ross, I strongly advise you to remember your surroundings." The warning silenced the room. Emily ceased speaking, but her perception remained acute. Maya stood there, cuffed, pale, and trembling. Blood trickled down her arm onto the courtroom floor, and something within Emily irrevocably shifted. One of the deputies reached for Maya's elbow, this time with more caution. "Let's go." Maya exhaled shakily. "I wish the record to reflect," she stated, her voice clear and steady, "that I declared my innocence." Whitmore offered a chilling smile. "The record reflects your conviction." Maya met his gaze. "No, the record reflects your decree." Leonard Pike closed his eyes briefly. Whitmore's expression hardened. "Escort her out." The deputies guided her toward a side door. Maya stumbled once, and the older deputy tightened his grip just enough to prevent her from falling without appearing to assist her. As they passed the gallery, an elderly black woman in a dark church coat rose partially from her seat, tears glinting in her eyes. "Baby," she whispered, too softly for the judge to hear. "Hold on." Maya glanced at her for a fleeting moment, but it was sufficient. There was no pity in that look, only a shared understanding. The woman had witnessed such wounds before. The corridor outside the courtroom felt colder than the room they had just left. Leonard Pike followed as far as the deputies permitted, his briefcase half open, papers protruding as if his thoughts had not yet caught up with the events that had just transpired. "I am filing emergency motions," he declared swiftly. "Appeals, judicial misconduct, everything within my capability." Maya turned her head towards him. Her face was pallid from pain and shock. "You should have fought more vigorously before." The words were not cruel. They were etched with weariness. Pike swallowed. "I know." She offered no further communication. At the end of the hallway, they escorted her into a holding elevator designated for prisoners and marshals. The metal doors descended with a heavy thud. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. One deputy stood beside her, the other opposite. Both maintained a forward gaze. Maya leaned back against the wall and looked down at the handkerchief wrapped around her arm. The white fabric had become dark crimson. Life without parole. This time, the phrase registered with full impact. Not 15 years, not 20, not a sentence with an endpoint to which she could cling. Whitmore had not merely punished her. He had obliterated her future. Her breathing grew shallow. She thought of her dormitory room near campus, the stack of law textbooks on her desk, a cheap lamp with a bent shade, a chipped blue mug, the sweater her mother constantly chided her for leaving on the floor. Trivial matters, ordinary elements of life, the kind that go unnoticed until they are irrevocably removed. The elevator doors opened onto the holding level. The air below smelled of disinfectant, concrete, and stale ventilation. They led her into a small interview room, equipped with a bolted metal table, 2 chairs, and a security camera mounted high in one corner. Someone placed a bottle of water and a wrapped turkey sandwich on the table. No explanation was offered. Perhaps the building itself was experiencing a shift in atmosphere, or perhaps news of the upstairs proceedings had already begun to circulate within the courthouse. Maya sat down slowly. Her shoulders ached from the impact of the bundle. The wound on her arm throbbed beneath the bandage. Her restraints remained in place. She regarded the sandwich without reaching for it. Minutes elapsed. Then the door creaked open. Emily Ross entered. She had removed her suit jacket, and the top button of her blouse was undone. For the first time that day, she appeared less like a prosecutor and more like a young woman who had witnessed something inexplicable. The deputy at the door hesitated before stepping aside, yielding only because she was still the assigned prosecutor. 5 minutes. Emily nodded. Once the door closed, she stood for a moment. "I should not be here," she admitted. Maya regarded her. "Then why are you?" Emily glanced at the bandage. "Because that should not have occurred." Maya's lips tightened. Many things should not have occurred. Emily accepted this without contest. She approached the table and placed a folded document before Maya. "Did your attorney ever present you with the complete financial decree?" Maya frowned. "No." Emily unfolded the paper. "He did not merely sentence you to life. He appended nearly every discretionary expense he could justify. Court recovery fees, compliance assessments, monitoring costs, administrative enforcement charges. Maya stared at the page, then up at Emily. Why? Emily offered no response. It was unnecessary. Maya lowered her voice. He does this frequently, doesn't he? Emily glanced towards the security camera before returning her gaze to Maya. I have witnessed him be severe. I have seen him be unjust. But this, she exhaled. No, this was not typical. It was typical for him, Maya stated softly. He knew precisely what he was doing. Emily studied her face for a long moment. When he began speaking about your mother, she finally said, why did you not inform him of her identity? Maya's eyes immediately became steely. That is not your concern. Perhaps not, Emily conceded. But I believe it is significant now. Maya leaned back in her chair, her movements deliberate despite the discomfort in her arm. What is significant is that he believed he could treat me this way, because he assumed no one in a position of authority would ever investigate. Emily remained silent. Maya looked down at the document again. Fee after fee, charge upon charge. A secondary penalty superimposed upon the initial one. Imprisonment was merely one form of interment. Debt represented another. A knock sounded at the door. The older deputy opened it partially. Miss Ross, they require you upstairs. Emily straightened, but did not move immediately. Then she spoke softly. I reviewed 3 prior cases before coming down here. 3 older cases. Black defendants, low income, the same judge, the same pattern of additional fees. Maya clutched her gauze. Emily swallowed. I do not know the precise nature of this yet, but I do not believe you are the first. The room became still. For the first time since the pronouncement of sentence, something within Maya also shifted. It was not hope. It was far too soon for that. But it was no longer an abyss of despair. What Whitmore had inflicted upon her possessed a pattern. A discernible structure and patterns, by their nature, can be exposed. At the door, Emily paused. If there is anything I need to know about your mother, about why he reacted as he did, Maya cut her off. When the moment arrives, you will know. Emily searched her face, then nodded once, and departed. The door closed behind her. Maya sat alone once more, with the water, the untouched sandwich, and the sentencing order spread across the metal table like a second wound. Somewhere above her, the activities of the courthouse continued. Elevators opening, phones ringing, clerks filing paperwork, lawyers heading home to ordinary evenings. Down here, beneath the same structure, Maya Williams finally comprehended the true intent of Harold Whitmore. He had not simply sentenced her. He had appraised her life as if it were expendable. And upstairs, the initial fissure had already begun to spread. Emily Ross did not return to her office immediately. She rode the elevator upward, the sentencing packet still in her hand, her jaw set, her mind replaying the sound of the file striking Maya Williams in the chest. By the time the doors opened on the courtroom floor, most of the hallway had emptied. The late afternoon exodus had commenced. Clerks carried boxes. A janitor wheeled a gray cart past the elevators. Somewhere down the corridor, a bailiff laughed excessively at something that was not humorous. Inside courtroom 7B, Judge Harold Whitmore was in chambers. His clerk, Nolan Pierce, was gathering loose papers from the bench. Emily entered. Where's the final cost breakdown? Nolan looked up. What? The sentencing attachments, the fee schedule, he added, referring to the Williams case. Nolan hesitated. They will be filed. I asked where they are. He lowered his voice. Judge Whitmore took the hard copy into chambers. Emily stared at him. Why? Nolan's expression tightened. You know how he is. Yes, Emily mused. I am beginning to. She turned without another word and walked down the side corridor toward Whitmore's private office. She knocked once. Come in, he said. Whitmore stood behind his desk, his robe still on, his glasses removed, pouring himself a cup of coffee from a carafe that had long gone stale. He appeared almost relaxed, an observation that, more than anything else, sent a shiver down Emily's spine. "You wanted something, Miss Ross?" Emily stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "The Williams sentencing order." He took a sip. "What about it?" "The enhanced financial penalties. I would like to review the calculation." Whitmore set the cup down. "You are the prosecutor, not an auditor. I am also an officer of the court." His eyes sharpened. "Be cautious." Emily did not flinch. Those figures were exceptionally high for a violent offender facing a life sentence. Whitmore inquired, "Not exceptionally high. Appropriate. She is 19. She is convicted. The evidence was unsubstantial. That was for the jury to decide, and the jury has rendered its verdict." Emily held his gaze. "You also struck the defendant with a file in open court." Whitmore's silence persisted, long enough to be unsettling. "She lost her footing," he finally stated. Emily recognized a falsehood when she heard one. The predicament was that he did too, and he was unconcerned. She was bleeding, and she received treatment. Emily took a slow breath. "I have reviewed 3 of your recent cases from the past year. 2 black defendants, 1 Latino, all low income, all sentenced with additional fee structures that extended well beyond standard practice. Similar language, similar addendums." Whitmore's expression remained unchanged, but a tension permeated the room. "I suggest," he advised, "that you cease conflating your political indoctrination with legal acumen. This is not politics." "No," he said softly. "It is ambition. Young legal minds often mistake discomfort for a moral compass. They encounter one challenging hearing and suddenly envision corruption where only discipline resides." Emily remained silent. Whitmore walked around the desk and stopped close enough to remind her that he had spent decades compelling people to step back. "You are here because individuals like myself established standards within this system. We maintained our integrity when others sought leniency. We safeguarded respectable communities from anarchy. We imposed order when subservience became fashionable." Emily maintained a level tone. "Order is not synonymous with cruelty." A faint smile touched his lips. "To those who have never had to rectify the consequences of lawlessness, it often appears identical." He moved past her and opened the chamber door, dismissing her without uttering the word. Emily departed, but she did not venture far. Back in the corridor, she stood still for a moment, then proceeded to the records department. The records office on the lower administrative level always carried the scent of dust, copier toner, and aged cardboard. A man named Calvin Rhee sat behind the glass partition, reading glasses perched halfway down his nose, stamping return labels. Emily slid her credentials under the opening. "I require archived sentencing appendices for Judge Whitmore. Cases from the last 3 years with post-judgment fee assessments." Calvin glanced at the badge, then at her face. "That's a considerable amount of documentation. I can wait." He studied her for another moment. Most individuals requesting Whitmore files don't appear eager to read them. "I am." He disappeared into the back, returning with a cart half an hour later. Emily spent the subsequent 2 hours engrossed in legal pads, case folders, and a stale vending machine coffee that tasted burnt. The pattern became increasingly difficult to disregard with each passing page. Young black defendants, older black defendants, impoverished white defendants from the South Side, a disabled veteran, a grocery clerk, a 19-year-old with no prior record. Time and again, Whitmore's phrasing recurred. Administrative recovery, supplemental review, compliance monitoring, judicial processing enhancement. The names varied, but the outcome did not. The impoverished paid more, and the black defendants paid the most. And each instance where one of those unusual fee structures appeared, a secondary notation surfaced elsewhere in the file trail. typically buried within vendor references or court-approved consulting support. One name appeared repeatedly: the Whitmore Legal Consulting Fund. Emily stared at it until the words no longer appeared to be coincidental. She pulled another file. The same result, and then another. By the time she returned to her seat, the illumination from the courthouse windows outside the records division had faded into the twilight. Custodian teams were commencing their nightly patrols. Her brewed beverage had long since cooled. Calvin Reese reappeared, bearing a bundle of incoming storage requisitions, and discovered her still present. "You appear as though your entire belief system has just been shattered," he remarked. Emily slowly lifted her gaze. "Have you ever encountered this designation?" He traced her finger to the line item and emitted a grunt. "Encountered, certainly. Inquired about it? That's a separate matter. Why?" Calvin let out a weary chuckle. "Because the individuals in this locale value their positions." Emily lowered her tone. "What is it about?" He paused, then rested one forearm on the counter. "Officially, it pertains to reform workshops, legal advisement, support for training programs, all that veneer of legitimacy." He cast a glance towards the corridor before continuing on a less formal note. "Everyone with tenure in this building is aware that certain magistrates favor specific avenues. Monetary transactions occur. No one documents it explicitly, but it happens." A shiver coursed through Emily. "Who orchestrates it?" Calvin straightened. "That's where prudent individuals cease their investigations." She held his gaze. "I am inquiring regardless." He regarded her for a protracted moment, then spoke in a hushed tone. "The judge's sibling-in-law has connections to a consultancy board. His nephew too, from what I've gathered. I've never seen it in any written record." He tapped the file. "I've simply observed the same conduits being utilized repeatedly." Emily's mouth grew parched. Upstairs, within a secured interview chamber, Maya Williams sat in solitude with a wrapped turkey sandwich, which he had yet to touch. The courthouse had grown more hushed around her, but not more accommodating. Her arm ached beneath the dressing. At intervals, she would hear footsteps in the hallway, the jingle of keys on belts, and the distant clanging of metal doors opening and closing. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She silently articulated the words, testing their cadence. It still lacked tangible reality. Nothing did. Not the magistrate's pronouncements, not the crimson stain on her sleeve, not the manner in which he had spoken of her mother. As if a woman he had never encountered was merely another entity to be degraded. Incarceration was one consequence. Financial obligation was another. He had sought both. The window pane darkened momentarily as someone paused outside, then moved onward. Maya lowered her eyes to the sentencing documents Emily had left behind. She reread the indictments, then the monetary penalties, then the precise legal phrasing. Each sentence felt more chilling than the last. At the apex of the concluding page, appended to the official decree as supplementary administrative material, was a designation code she had previously overlooked. WLCF. Maya stared at the initials. Then she looked up as the door swung open, and Emily Ross re-entered the room, her complexion even paler than before. "What is WLCF?" Maya inquired. Emily closed the door behind her. For an instant she remained silent. Then she drew the chair opposite Maya's and sat down. "I believe," she stated cautiously, "that your magistrate may not simply be malicious. He may be profiting." Maya held her gaze. Emily placed a collection of photocopied pages on the table. "I believe he is accumulating wealth." Maya looked at Emily Ross without blinking. For a moment, the only sound within the holding chamber was the low thrum of the overhead ventilation. "What do you mean, accumulating wealth?" Maya asked. Emily slid the copied pages across the metallic table. I examined several prior sentencing records from Whitmore's courtroom. The same pattern emerges. Black defendants, impoverished defendants, those with limited recourse. He imposes substantial court costs, administrative levies, compliance charges, and monitoring expenses. The verbiage varies slightly, but the underlying structure remains consistent. Maya looked down at the pages, her bandaged arm resting rigidly at her side. And that code? Emily touched the line at the bottom of one enclosure. WLCF, the Whitmore Legal Consulting Fund. Maya's expression remained impassive, but her eyes sharpened. That's not a court office. No, Emily confirmed. It's presented as a consultative body, offering reform training, legal compliance assistance, and ongoing judicial education. On paper, it appears reputable, perhaps even mundane. She paused. It consistently appears in conjunction with cases that were burdened by excessive financial penalties. Maya read in silence for a few seconds, her gaze scanning names, figures, and lines of stark official language, all meticulously crafted to convey an impression of routine. He targets individuals who cannot mount a defense, she stated softly. Emily did not respond immediately. That's precisely what it suggests, she finally conceded. Maya exhaled slowly. Not just incarceration, she murmured. Indebtedness as well. Precisely. Maya leaned back in her chair and surveyed the stack. So he doesn't merely ruin people, he bills them. Emily glanced at her sharply. That was precisely the sensation she had experienced, and hearing Maya articulate it aloud made it even more repugnant. Before she could reply, the door opened. The elder deputy stood there, his expression stern. Miss Ross, you are required upstairs. Emily rose. I'll return. The deputy's gaze flickered to Maya, then to the papers on the table. You should take those with you. Emily grasped the implicit warning. She gathered the copies, inadvertently leaving one page behind, then seemed to reconsider and deliberately made no move to retrieve it. 5 minutes, she informed Maya quietly. Once the door had closed again, Maya looked at the solitary sheet remaining on the table. It was a summary page from another case. The defendant was a 19-year-old black male from the South Side. No prior felony convictions, sentenced under Whitmore 2 years prior. The financial penalties were so substantial that Maya had to reread the total twice. At the bottom, in neat printed characters, was the same designation, WLCF. Maya closed her eyes for a single second. Judge Harold Whitmore had looked down at her from the bench as if she were refuse, as if she were yet another dangerous element dragged in from the streets. But this was not about morality. It wasn't even about punishment. It was commerce. The thought turned her stomach. Upstairs, the courthouse had acquired the anxious pulse of a place sensing an imminent shift, but unaware of the impending collapse. Emily proceeded swiftly down the corridor toward the smaller conference room adjacent to the clerk's office. Inside, 2 gentlemen from court administration were already waiting with Nolan Pierce, Whitmore's clerk. Files were piled on the table. No one appeared at ease. One of the administrators, a man with graying hair named Gerald Finn, spoke first. Miss Ross, there are concerns that you have been requesting records beyond the scope of your case. Emily remained standing. The concern exists because I have identified a pattern. Gerald folded his hands. What you have discovered may be standard discretionary practice that you are misinterpreting. Nolan kept his eyes fixed on the table. Emily stated, standard practice does not explain why additional fees disproportionately affect specific types of defendants, or why a private consulting fund repeatedly appears in associated documentation. This caused Nolan to look up. Gerald's tone became cooler. You are levying a serious accusation. I am posing a serious question. From the hallway, the sound of measured footsteps approached. Then the door opened. Judge Whitmore entered without haste. The atmosphere in the room transformed instantly. Gerald stood. Nolan stood. Emily remained in her position. Whitmore glanced at her once, then at the files on the table. Still pursuing paperwork, Miss Ross. I have found sufficient grounds to question why your courtroom consistently routes unusual costs through entities linked to WLCF. Whitmore's countenance remained composed, but his eyes became impassive. That fund supports lawful judicial training initiatives. Then why is it so frequently associated with cases involving indigent defendants and excessive penalties? Gerald cleared his throat. Perhaps we should all proceed with greater caution. No, Emily declared. I don't believe we should. Whitmore moved further into the room. This is the consequence of youth mistaking suspicion for acumen. Emily met his gaze. Did you establish a revenue stream by sentencing individuals who could not defend themselves? Nolan inhaled sharply. Whitmore did not raise his voice. You are dangerously close to career self-destruction. Emily registered the threat, but she did not retreat. And you are dangerously close to something far worse. For a brief instant, silence prevailed. Then Whitmore smiled. It was the most unsettling expression Emily had ever witnessed on a human face, devoid of any warmth. You witnessed one young woman weeping in court, he stated. And now you believe you have uncovered this. She was bleeding. She had been sentenced. She was innocent. That was the breaking point. Whitmore's smile vanished. You are in no position, he said, each word clipped and precise, to tell me what innocence looks like. Perhaps not, Emily responded before caution could restrain her. But I know what cruelty looks like, Gerald muttered. Enough. Whitmore turned from Emily to the administrators, as if deliberating whether to crush her immediately or postpone it. I want all non-essential file access pertaining to my prior sentencing appendices suspended pending further review. Emily spoke instantly. You cannot restrict records simply because I posed questions. Whitmore looked back at her. Watch me. He exited. Gerald exhaled deeply and rubbed his forehead. Nolan sat down slowly, visibly unnerved. Emily understood in that moment that whatever boundary she had crossed, there was no turning back. Whitmore was now apprehensive. Not overtly, not enough for most to perceive it. But frightened individuals in positions of power do not restrict access unless something significant is at stake. Downstairs, Maya was still seated alone when another key turned in the lock. This time, it was not Emily. A woman in a dark coat entered first, followed by two men in civilian attire whom Maya did not recognize. The woman was tall, elegant, and possessed a controlled demeanor akin to a drawn blade. She carried no handbag, no briefcase, no wasted movement. Her face was composed, but her eyes immediately fell upon the bandage on Maya's arm. Maya stood so abruptly that her chair scraped the floor. For the first time since her sentencing, something other than fear or anger flickered across her features. Mom. Evelyn Williams moved towards her daughter, stopping just short of touching the blood-stained sleeve. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady. Tell me everything he did. And in the corridor outside, those who still had no inkling of Maya Williams' true identity began to comprehend that the quiet of the building had ended. Maya's throat constricted so tightly she could barely speak. Evelyn Williams stood before her in a dark wool coat and black gloves. Her expression serene, her gaze fixed on the dressing around Maya's arm. The two men behind her remained near the door, silent and observant. They were not courthouse personnel. Their bearing was different, more precise, more menacing. Maya swallowed. He threw the file at me. Evelyn did not flinch. Begin from the start. The room felt more confined now. The metal table, the untouched sandwich, the camera in the corner, the fluorescent light humming overhead. Maya looked at her mother and realized she had never seen her like this before. Not angry in the conventional sense. Colder than anger. Focused. He called me filth before the sentencing even commenced, Maya recounted. He said I deserved to rot and die in prison. I told him I was innocent. He kept interrupting me. Then he started talking about you. One of the men by the door shifted slightly. Evelyn remained immobile. What did he say? Maya's voice deepened. He said, "You disappointed me." He said, "You should be ashamed to have raised me." He said, "I was proof that you failed as a mother." For a fleeting moment, Evelyn's face underwent a transformation. It was not a breakdown. It was something far more profound. A stillness so absolute that it compelled the entire room to acknowledge it. Maya continued. I told him not to speak about you. I said, "The failure in that courtroom was not yours." She glanced down at her bandaged arm. That's when he threw the file. Evelyn stepped closer. "Did anyone touch you after?" The medic cleaned it. No stitches. They said they needed clearance. The woman's jaw tightened. One of the men behind her, broad-shouldered with a closely cropped gray beard, produced a small notebook. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I would like a full statement while the details are fresh." Evelyn raised one hand without looking back. Not yet. She then reached out very carefully and touched Maya's uninjured shoulder. It was the first physical contact since her arrival. The gesture was subtle, yet it almost undid Maya more than the sentence itself. She looked away quickly, fighting the sting in her eyes. "I told you," Evelyn said softly. "If they believed no one would come seeking answers, they would reveal their true nature." Maya let out a short, brittle laugh devoid of any humor. "I didn't think it would happen this quickly." Neither did I. That answer hung suspended between them. Evelyn removed one glove, then the other, and placed them neatly on the table next to the untouched sandwich. "Look at me." Maya complied. "You are not going to disappear within this building." Evelyn stated, "Do you understand?" Maya nodded once. "No," Evelyn corrected. "Say it. I am not going to disappear within this building." Her voice was steadier now. Maya repeated the sentence. Evelyn gave the slightest nod. Then she turned to the man by the door. "I want photographic evidence of that injury. I want the medical refusal documented. I want the courtroom transcript preserved before any linguistic alterations are made." The man with the notebook responded immediately, already in motion. "And no one touches Judge Whitmore's files?" "Yes, ma'am." The second man, younger, with a federal credential clipped inside his coat, stepped into the room. "We're encountering resistance upstairs. Court administration indicates prior sentencing appendices are being restricted." Evelyn's eyes grew colder. "By whose directive?" "Whitmore's directive." She picked up the sentencing packet on the table and scanned it with alarming speed. Her gaze moved over the life sentence first, then the financial breakdown. Line after line of fees, assessments, recovery charges, enforcement costs. When she reached the bottom, she paused. "What is WLCF?" Maya inquired softly. Evelyn did not answer immediately. She re-examined the letters. Then, addressing the senior agent, "Retrieve corporate records, donor filings, tax structure, board memberships, vendor affiliations, a full sweep tonight." The man nodded. "You recognize the acronym?" "I recognize it shouldn't be present." A beat passed. Maya understood then that her mother had perceived something more significant than a cruel sentence, something systemic, something familiar. The door opened behind them, and Emily Ross entered. She stopped abruptly upon seeing Evelyn Williams. For a moment, no one spoke. Emily had seen the Attorney General on television, in Senate hearings, at podiums, and in legal journals. But those portrayals had always been framed by distance and office. This version stood within a concrete holding room beneath a federal courthouse, next to a bleeding 20-year-old in handcuffs. Emily found her voice first. "Madam Attorney General." Evelyn turned towards her. "You are the prosecutor who came downstairs." Emily nodded. "Emily Ross. You provided her with the financial order." Yes, ma'am. Why? Emily looked at Maya, then back at Evelyn. Because what transpired upstairs was wrong. And because after reviewing other cases, I began to suspect it was not merely wrong, it was a pattern. Evelyn studied her face. You said, began. Emily understood the test. Now I am certain. One of the agents shifted, a flicker of skepticism in his posture. Evelyn did not instruct him to desist. Emily stepped closer to the table and laid down another small stack of photocopied pages. I discovered analogous fee structures in multiple cases. Predominantly black defendants, predominantly indigent, the same inflated administrative verbiage, the same references linked to WLCF. I also found informal indications suggesting the fund may be connected to Judge Whitmore's family. The room fell silent. Maya watched her mother read the first page, then the next. The Attorney General's expression remained composed, but an intensity in the atmosphere sharpened with each line. Finally, Evelyn looked up. Did anyone else witness you copying these? Emily hesitated. Court administration is aware I have been making inquiries. Whitmore knows I am investigating. That makes you valuable, Evelyn stated, and vulnerable. Emily straightened. I understand. Do you? Evelyn inquired. Because after tonight, this is not merely professional discomfort. This is a federal corruption investigation orbiting an active judge who believed he could bury my daughter under incarceration and debt. If you remain involved, you cannot treat it as an intermittent engagement. Emily met her eyes. I am staying. Maya looked between them. The room had transformed once more. It no longer felt like a place where she had been left to wait. It felt like the initial phase of a conflict her judge had not anticipated. Evelyn handed the pages to the senior agent. Secure Whitmore's courtroom records. Notify the DOJ Public Integrity Section. Alert the Inspector General. And I want every discretionary fee order he signed in the past 5 years. The younger agent inquired. And the judge himself? Evelyn picked up her gloves from the table but did not put them on. Not yet, she said. First, I want to ascertain how many lives he has bartered before he touched mine. Maya felt those words settle into the room with the weight of law. Upstairs. Judge Harold Whitmore remained behind his desk, assuring himself that control had not slipped, convincing himself that a frightened young woman and an ambitious prosecutor could not dismantle years of authority. But beneath the courthouse, in a concrete room he would never have considered significant, the ground beneath him had already begun to yield. And for the first time since the sentence had been pronounced, Maya no longer felt buried. She felt the weight above her shift. By 9:30 that night, the federal building no longer felt like a courthouse. It felt like a body struggling to conceal its own fever. Doors that were typically left ajar were now firmly shut. Clerks, who usually passed each other with stacks of documents, now ceased their conversations upon the appearance of unfamiliar faces. 2 individuals from the Department of Justice had commandeered a small conference room on the administrative floor. A representative from the Inspector General's office was on a secure line in Washington. Down in the holding area, Maya Williams sat with fresh gauze on her arm and dried blood still stiff on the sleeve of her county-issued shirt, while the apparatus that had attempted to engulf her began, piece by piece, to choke on its own documentation. Emily Ross was the one navigating between these 2 spheres. As she exited the conference room, the younger DOJ agent intercepted her in the hallway. His name was Daniel Mercer. He was in his 30s, neat, sharp-eyed, and already burdened with an excessive number of folders. We have preliminary corporate records, he stated quietly. WLCF is legitimate, a registered nonprofit advisory entity. Its public-facing mission involving judicial education, sentencing reform support, and legal systems consultation. Emily continued walking. Who comprises the board? Officially, esteemed individuals, retired legal professionals. One former accounting professor appears benign. He handed her a sheet. Unofficially, The fund's operations are channeled through vendor management to a consulting firm controlled by Whitmore's brother-in-law, Stuart Bell. Emily stopped walking. "And the nephew?" she inquired. Mercer nodded. "Caleb Bell is listed under external procurement management for 2 affiliated contractors." Emily looked down at the papers. The name sat there in clear black print, respectable and dry. That was the nature of corruption within institutions. It rarely announced itself with overt violence. More often, it adopted the language of administration and waited for people to become disengaged before the damage became apparent. "Do they receive direct transfers from court-imposed penalties?" she asked. Mercer exhaled. "Not directly, not in an obvious manner. Funds are routed through approved administrative channels initially, then into service agreements, compliance, educational contracts, reimbursement for consulting services. Enough layers to lend an air of legitimacy, but not enough," Emily interjected. "No," he replied, "not enough." They reached the records room and found it partially sealed off. Calvin Reese was inside behind the counter, engaged in a low-voiced argument with Nolan Pierce. Whitmore's clerk looked up the moment he saw Emily and Mercer. "This area is temporarily under review," Nolan stated too quickly. "No further file access without judicial authorization." Mercer presented his credentials. "Legal validation is no longer your most effective safeguard this evening." Nolan's countenance paled. Calvin Reese shifted back in his seat and murmured, "Well, that's the first sensible utterance I've encountered in this establishment for an age." Emily advanced to the counter. "I require every case from the past 5 years that includes supplementary compliance evaluations or augmented court recovery stipulations." Nolan attempted again. "Those documents are confidential." Mercer's tone remained composed. "Precisely why we are acquiring them." Calvin rose with a deliberation that outpaced the others and adjusted his spectacles. "Told you so," he remarked, without directing his gaze at anyone in particular. "Those avenues were overused." Nolan's jaw tightened. "You should exercise caution regarding your implications." Calvin offered him a prolonged, weary appraisal. "Son, at my age, caution is a state you attain after dedicating too many years to observing improprieties unfold in silent chambers." Emily remained silent. She simply retrieved the initial file box that Calvin placed on the counter and commenced its organization. The discernible pattern intensified with each document. A single father, black, financially ruined following a conviction for a nonviolent offense. A 17-year-old individual remanded to adult jurisdiction and burdened with perpetual court-imposed financial obligations. A home health aide sentenced under Whitmore's decree subsequent to a plea she scarcely comprehended, and subsequently charged with oversight fees that pursued her for years. An unemployed veteran who failed to remit payments and was reintegrated into the system as if a delinquent account rather than a citizen. Each instance bore its unique affliction. Collectively, they evinced the truth. Whitmore did not merely pronounce judgments. He assigned monetary valuations based on the perceived inadequacy of protection afforded by their identities. Downstairs, Maya sat in solitude for nearly 20 minutes after Evelyn had been escorted into another secure area with agents and legal counsel. The turkey sandwich remained untouched. She had taken a solitary sip of water and nothing further. The adrenaline from the courtroom had dissipated, leaving behind a profound, peculiar exhaustion that felt more oppressive than slumber. A female marshal approached the door and unlocked it. "Miss Williams?" she stated, with a gentleness Maya had not anticipated. "We need to transfer you to a secure room." Maya rose languidly. "Am I being relocated?" "No." "Then what is this?" The marshal paused. "It signifies that individuals upstairs are finally employing alternative terminology when referencing you." Maya nearly inquired about the meaning of this statement, but was too fatigued to expend energy on explanations offered only partially. She followed the marshal down a more confined corridor to a space that resembled an interview setting for protected witnesses rather than a holding cell. There was no camera in the corner this time, only a table, 2 chairs, and a softly humming ventilation system. When the door opened once more, Evelyn entered alone. She had removed her outerwear. The dark suit beneath was immaculate despite the late hour. Yet the lines of exhaustion framing her mouth had deepened. She sat down opposite Maya and placed a slim folder on the table. "We have confirmed the funding," she announced. Maya observed her mother's face. "And it is more dire than I had hoped and less astonishing than I had feared." Maya allowed the statement to resonate. "He has been engaged in this practice for an extensive period." "Indeed?" "Targeting black defendants." "Yes." "And impoverished individuals." "Yes." Maya gazed at the table, her voice diminishing. "He was aware of his actions when he regarded me." Evelyn did not temper the reality. "Yes." The room fell silent. Maya experienced the affirmation as more acutely painful than the laceration on her arm. Not because she had been oblivious to prejudice, she had not. Every black woman in America learned from an early age to decipher tone, posture, interruptions, and suspicion. However, there was a distinct quality to hearing it validated through the idiom of deliberate design. He had not merely harbored animosity for what he observed. He had architected a system around it. "He spoke of you as though he possessed the entitlement," Evelyn stated. Evelyn's eyes met hers. Men such as Whitmore invariably believe they possess such entitlement. The pertinent question is for how long others consent to feign agreement. Maya averted her gaze for a moment, blinking back the intense pressure gathering behind her eyes. "I had presumed that by remaining silent long enough, I would perceive the system with honesty." "And now you have." Maya emitted a sardonic chuckle. "Honesty, it appears, comes at a considerable price." Evelyn glanced at the dressing. That was invariably an element of the design. She opened the folder and slid a page towards her daughter. It was a summary chart. Columns, names, penalty totals, race, income bracket, appended charges, recurrence identifiers. Maya read the initial 5 entries, then paused. There were too many. A rap sounded, and Daniel Mercer entered. "Ma'am, we have activity." Evelyn looked up. "What sort?" "Financial. 2 interconnected accounts linked to Bell Consulting were accessed within the past hour. Someone is attempting to transfer funds." Evelyn rose immediately. "Immobilize them," she commanded. "We are initiating proceedings concerning Whitmore." Mercer's expression hardened. Still in his chambers. Still behaving as though this is a mere misunderstanding. Evelyn retrieved her coat from the chair, but did not immediately put it on. "That sentiment will dissipate." Mercer departed. Evelyn turned back to Maya. "For tonight, you are under federal protection," she declared. "No transfers, no general confinement. No one is to access your file without authorization from my office." Maya nodded. Evelyn moved closer, and for an instant, she appeared less like the Attorney General and more like a mother compelled to maintain an unyielding facade while standing before her injured child. "This is no longer solely about what he perpetrated against you in that courtroom," she stated. "It concerns what he has inflicted upon hundreds of individuals who lacked anyone to intercede on their behalf." Maya slowly raised her eyes. A transformation was occurring within her. Not healing, not yet, but solidifying into a determined form. "When this erupts," she said quietly, "I want every name." Evelyn studied her daughter for a protracted second, then offered a subtle nod. "That," she responded, "is the initial utterance you have made this evening that resonates with my own perspective." Beyond the secure chamber, the building's illumination persisted late into the night. Records were catalogued, accounts were flagged, whispers escalated into communications. Communications transformed into directives. And somewhere above them, Judge Harold Whitmore continued to preside from the chambers, where he had exercised authority for years, entirely oblivious to the fact that the figures he had concealed behind legal phraseology were finally beginning to reveal themselves. At 11:14 in the evening, the first family arrived, bearing a grocery bag filled with receipts. Emily Ross observed them through the transparent wall of the temporary conference room on the administrative floor. An elderly black woman, adorned in a church hat, which she had clearly donned in haste. A middle-aged man clad in work boots and a faded union jacket, and a younger woman clutching a manila folder tightly against her chest as if it might disintegrate if she loosened her grip. Their presence so late was not anticipated. However, once news circulated throughout Chicago that Judge Harold Whitmore's prior fee mandates were undergoing scrutiny, individuals appeared, not out of confidence in the system, but because they had awaited years for a breach within it. Daniel Mercer met them at the door, collected their names, and brought the folder inside. Emily stood at the lengthy table, surrounded by boxes of documents, replicated fee schedules, printouts of corporate filings, and cups of styrofoam that had long gone cold. Evelyn Williams was at the far end, engaged in a secure conversation with Washington, speaking in hushed, clipped phrases. She concluded the call the instant she noticed the envelope. "Who are they?" Evelyn inquired. Mercer opened the flap and spread the contents. Old payment stubs, delinquency notices, court enforcement correspondence, all rubber-stamped, dated, and folded so many times that the creases had become white. "A family from a 2022 case," he stated. The defendant was Andre Fuller, 19 at the time of conviction. Black, no prior non-violent burglary plea. Whitmore imposed a 12-year sentence and layered on substantial fees. Emily picked up one receipt, $690 for compliance review, another document, monitoring, recovery fee, administrative processing assessment, post-judgment enforcement. The elder woman stepped forward from the doorway before anyone had extended an invitation. Her face was etched with lines, weary yet dignified. "He never even clarified the meaning of half those terms," she articulated. "He simply continued to dispatch bills. My grandson received incarceration, and then we were penalized for loving him." The room became hushed. Evelyn addressed her. "Your name, ma'am?" "Laverne Fuller." "Mrs. Fuller?" Evelyn inquired. "Did any court representative ever inform you of the destination of these fees?" Laverne emitted a short, sharp laugh. "No, ma'am. They merely advised us that if we ceased payments, circumstances could deteriorate." Emily felt the words lodge somewhere behind her ribs. Circumstances could deteriorate. That was the methodology by which systems of this nature endured. Not through a singular dramatic threat, but through 1,000 officially phrased warnings that instilled in people a reluctance to pose questions. Laverne tapped one of the notices with her finger. "I cleaned residences for 18 months to keep pace with that obligation. I even sold my husband's tools. He had been deceased for 6 years. I still sold them." No one in the room interrupted her. "My grandson made errors," she continued. "I am aware that we are devout individuals. We do not condone wrongdoing. However, that judge..." Her mouth tightened. That man regarded us as if we were born owing him something. Evelyn exchanged a look with Mercer. "Obtain complete duplicates, every page." "Yes, ma'am." As Mercer proceeded to scan the documents, additional names began to be registered. A retired bus operator whose son had remitted court obligations for 6 years subsequent to his release. A widow from Bronzeville whose nephew had been billed for supervisory expenses while already detained. An elderly couple who had refinanced their residence to prevent their grandson's default on fees they did not comprehend. By midnight, the corridor adjacent to the conference room accommodated 6 families, and an atmosphere of quietude prevailed, feeling more burdensome than panic. These were not vocal individuals. Most of them spoke softly, courteously, even at this juncture, older Americans who had spent their entire lives understanding that institutions were most receptive to those who did not express anger. Yet, the anguish contained within their folders was undeniable. Emily moved among them, taking statements. Each exchange revealed the same underlying theme. Whitmore subjected the impoverished to a double penalty, first through the sentence, then through the invoice. Down in the secure chamber, Maya sat with her mother's summary chart displayed before her. She had perused the initial 10 names on 3 occasions. She was now on number 11, compelling herself to refrain from omitting the details. Age, charge, prior record, sentence, appended fees. The same sequence repeated itself invariably. A gentle knock sounded, and Evelyn entered. Maya looked up. There are more. Yes. How many? We are not yet certain. Maya swallowed. You suspected the existence of something of this nature, did you not? Evelyn did not respond immediately. She closed the door behind her and sat opposite her daughter. I was aware of judges who treated sentencing as a theatrical performance. I was aware of jurisdictions that employed fines and fees as a secondary form of punishment against the indigent. I suspected individuals were embellishing greed with respectable documentation. She paused. I was unaware that Whitmore had constructed such an extensive apparatus. Maya lowered her eyes to the chart. He regarded me as if he had already quantified my worth. He had, Evelyn confirmed. That is the behavior of predators. Maya's hand tightened on the edge of the paper. Then why is everyone expressing shock now? Because it becomes easier for individuals to disregard cruelty when it is concealed behind forms, codes, and procedural regulations. Maya fell silent. Then she inquired, Are they present due to me? Evelyn studied her face. They are present because a door was opened. You are the catalyst for its opening. That holds significance. However, their suffering was authentic prior to this evening. Maya nodded slowly. Outside, Emily concluded, taking a statement from a man in his 60s, exhibiting a tremor in his right hand. He held a stack of notices bound by a rubber band. My son was released 4 years ago, he stated, and he is still making payments on paperwork they dispatched from that courtroom. You tell me, how does a sentence conclude if the bill does not? Emily lacked a response commensurate with the gravity of the question. She accepted the documents and carried them back into the conference room, where Daniel Mercer was affixing transaction charts to a whiteboard. Stuart Bell's corporate facade had now been linked to 3 distinct vendor channels associated with Whitmore's courtroom fee structures. Caleb Bell's name surfaced in procurement approvals. The financial nexus was no longer ambiguous. It was becoming more precise. Mercer gestured to the most recent printout. We have frozen one account. Another attempted to transfer $28,000 before the hold was implemented. Someone is apprehensive. They ought to be, Evelyn declared. Emily placed the new receipts on the table. Families are arriving with original notices and payment records. Some date back years. Evelyn surveyed the accumulating pile and then glanced towards the glass partition beyond which more individuals were seated on plastic chairs beneath courthouse lights, excessively bright for midnight. This is no longer a review, she stated softly. It is an excavation. No one demurred. A few minutes later, Evelyn brought Maya upstairs. Not through the main corridor. Not in handcuffs. 2 federal agents accompanied them, but Maya moved under her own volition, a bandage visible beneath the rolled sleeve of a borrowed cardigan someone had procured for her. When the families in the waiting area observed her, the atmosphere in the room transformed. Laverne Fuller was the first to rise. Maya halted. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Laverne looked at the bandage on Maya's arm, then into her face. He inflicted that upon you? She inquired. Maya nodded once. Laverne's expression shifted. Not surprise, but recognition. Then he grew careless, she stated. The words resonated through the room as a truth universally understood. A retired gentleman near the wall slowly rose to his feet. Then the widow from Bronzeville. Then the couple with the home refinancing documents. One by one, the elderly men and women in that waiting area stood. Not with loudness, not with dramatics, but with the grave composure of individuals who had spent far too many years bearing humiliation in envelopes. Maya gazed from face to face, and a sense of alignment settled within her. Whitmore had intended for her to feel isolated in that courtroom. He had failed. Evelyn glanced at her daughter, then at the assembled families, and then back towards the conference room where the charts, receipts, and names continued to spread across the tables. "Obtain everyone's statements," she instructed Emily. "Every fee notice, every payment slip, every threatening letter. I want the human cost meticulously documented alongside the financial trail." Emily nodded. Maya stood in the center of the waiting area, the blood once spilled by the court still concealed beneath fresh dressings. And for the first time since the sentence was pronounced, she apprehended the unfolding events with absolute clarity. This was not merely the inception of Whitmore's downfall. It was the moment when the individuals he had presumed would remain silent began to emerge, one receipt at a time. By midnight, the federal building had transformed into something Judge Harold Whitmore had never envisioned. It was no longer a locale where apprehension flowed in a singular direction. The waiting area outside the temporary conference room had become populated with elderly black parents, grandparents, uncles, widows, men with weathered hands, women clutching envelopes that had been opened and refolded so many times their paper had acquired the texture of cloth. Some sat in silence, their documents resting on their laps. Others conversed in low tones, comparing dates, case numbers, the specific terminology on their notices. Repeatedly, the same phrases surfaced: administrative recovery, compliance assessment, supplemental review, post-judgment enforcement. Emily Ross stood near the copier, holding another stack of fee notices, and felt a deepening sense of unease with each page she handled. None of it had appeared overtly alarming when she first encountered it in the files. That was its inherent brilliance. It was not designed to appear dramatic. It was constructed to appear official. Daniel Mercer moved between the tables, affixing new documents to the whiteboard. Corporate charts, vendor channels, timestamps, family affiliations. A single red line now connected the Whitmore Legal Consulting Fund to Bell Judicial Strategies. Another linked Bell Judicial Strategies to two procurement contractors whose approvals were repeatedly granted in cases bearing Whitmore's augmented financial penalties. Evelyn Williams stood at the head of the room, examining a growing roster of defendants. Her posture was erect, her expression composed, but the cadence of her directives had quickened. "I require race, income level, sentence duration, and total fees to be cross-referenced," she stated. "I want the release status flagged. I want every vendor payment under WLCF matched against courtroom penalty dates. And I demand independent custody of the original receipts from these families before anyone presumes that paper can disappear." Mercer nodded. Already initiated. Maya stood near the rear wall, clad in the borrowed cardigan, her bandaged arm held close to her body. No one had requested her departure. No one had instructed her to sit quietly and remain silent any longer. Yet, she still felt the weight of the sentence on her skin, like something cold and damp. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The words had not ceased to exist simply because individuals now addressed her with greater consideration. An elderly gentleman in a tan overcoat approached the intake table, holding a folder flat in both hands. "My name is Louis Harper," he informed Emily. "My son's case was 3 years ago. Whitmore imposed an 8-year sentence and nearly $30,000 in court costs and fees. We never comprehended why the amount continued to escalate." Emily accepted the folder. "Do you still possess the notices?" Harper offered a melancholic smile. "Ma'am, when a court repeatedly threatens your child via mail, you learn not to discard anything." He handed over a stack of letters clipped together with a rusted binder clip. Emily scanned the initial page and felt her stomach clench once more. The same coding, the same language, the same pattern. Maya observed from across the room as additional names were inscribed on the board. Andre Fuller, Jerome Pike, Latasha Hines, Marcus Bellamy, Denise Warren. The names did not feel like mere data. They felt like an indictment composed of individuals. Evelyn turned towards her daughter. "You need to sit." "I am well." "You appear pale." I said, "I am well." The response emerged sharper than Maya had intended. A few heads turned. Evelyn remained silent for a moment. Then she crossed the room and lowered her voice. "Maintaining an upright posture is not synonymous with being well." Maya looked away. "I do not wish to be sequestered in a quiet place while everyone else bears this burden." Evelyn studied her face. "Do you perceive my protective actions as a form of punishment?" "I believe he desired me to be inconsequential," Maya stated. "I am finished assisting him." That remark arrested Evelyn, not because the words were defiant, but because they were truthful. Across the room, Emily was interviewing a widow from Bronzeville named Claudette Shaw, whose grandson had been billed thousands for community re-entry monitoring expenses while still incarcerated. They advised that if we fell behind, it could impact his standing. Claudette recounted, her voice trembling but steady enough to continue. "So, I paid what I could. My Social Security check, church sewing funds, my husband's old life insurance. You continue to pay when the letterhead appears official." "Did you believe perhaps the next envelope would be the final one?" Emily inquired softly. Claudette emitted a hollow laugh. "No, ma'am, it never is." Mercer approached with another document in hand. "We have encountered a predicament." The room quieted. "What sort?" Evelyn asked. "A financial witness connected to Bell Judicial Strategies, a mid-level account administrator. Her name is Sandra Kroll. She managed reimbursement schedules and vendor certifications. We had submitted a request to conduct her interview first thing in the morning." He looked down at the page. "She has simply vanished." Emily straightened. "Vanished? How?" "She departed her apartment 40 minutes ago. Her vehicle remains there. Her phone is inactive. A neighbor observed 2 individuals in a dark SUV." Evelyn's expression hardened. "Did she have knowledge that we were investigating her?" Mercer hesitated. "Not officially. Then someone is acting more swiftly than we are." Maya felt the atmosphere in the room shift. Up to that point, the corruption had resided within files, receipts, and names. Now, it had relocated. This rendered it more perilous and more concrete. Emily inquired, "What information did Kroll possess?" "Vendor routing records," Mercer replied. "Potentially internal communications. Send only text, without instructions or commentary." If she had spoken, she could have linked the fund directly to the Bell network. Evelyn provided her answer without hesitation. "Find her." Mercer was already reaching for his phone. "Place a hold on all Bell-associated travel, banking, and device activity. Alert the FBI field office. Discreetly, ma'am. I do not want sirens yet. And investigate Whitmore's chambers and his residence." "Yes, ma'am." As Mercer departed, the room fell into a tense silence. One of the elder women seated in the waiting area raised a hand to her chest, as if to steady her breathing. Maya glanced at her mother. They are attempting to suppress it. Evelyn met her gaze. That is what men like him do when their secrecy no longer protects them. Maya recalled the courtroom, the file flung at her, Whitmore's voice when he declared her mother had failed. Back then, he had seemed invincible. Now, the tone of his authority was shifting. It was no longer assurance. It was fear masked as protocol. Emily approached, carrying another stack of copied notices. "We ought to relocate the family to a more secure location," she suggested. "If this situation is escalating, we do not know who else might be observing." Evelyn nodded. "Agreed. No one is to depart without providing us with their contact details. Arrange transportation if they require it." I want every original document cataloged before sunrise. One of the elder gentlemen near the door spoke up then. He had remained silent for nearly an hour. Broad shoulders, streaks of gray at his temples, his voice low and rough with age. "Ma'am," he said to Evelyn, "we came because we have been paying for years and no one listened. Do not let this become just another pile of paper." Evelyn walked over to him herself. "It will not," she replied. He held her gaze. "People in institutions like this say that all the time." Evelyn did not waver. "I am aware. That is precisely why I am not asking you to place your faith in this building. I am asking you to observe our subsequent actions." The man gave a single, slow nod. Maya stood a few feet away and felt those words resonate within her. Observe our subsequent actions. Not hope, not wait. Observe. The conference room door opened again, and Daniel Mercer returned, his breathing more labored than before. "We have detected activity on Whitmore's end," he reported. His clerk made 2 late calls from a private line, one to Stuart Bell, the other to a number associated with a document shredding service utilized by the court administration. Emily let out an audible expletive. Evelyn's voice hardened to iron. "Secure all records immediately, both physical and digital. I want agents stationed at every archive room, every disposal route, every terminal that handled his fee appendices. No one is to purge anything tonight." Mercer nodded and departed again at a near sprint. The building was now alive in a new way. Not with the usual fatigue of bureaucracy, but with the intense pulse of an institution being compelled to incriminate itself. Maya looked through the glass wall at the waiting families, at the envelopes and folders resting on their laps, at the men and women who had been victimized one payment slip at a time, long before she ever set foot in Whitmore's courtroom. The abrasion on her arm throbbed beneath the dressing. Her body still retained the memory of the force with which the file had struck her. The judgment still weighed on her chest like a stone. But something else now stood alongside it. She was no longer witnessing a single judge ruin a single life. She was observing an entire apparatus exposed by the very individuals it had intended to keep insignificant. And somewhere in Chicago, a woman named Sandra Kroll was missing, because the wrong people had finally realized they might not escape repercussions. At 1 hour and 7 minutes past midnight, the initial tangible clue emerged from a highway traffic surveillance camera on the near west side. Daniel Mercer entered the conference room doors once more, a printout clutched in one hand and his phone still in the other. His tie was gone. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. For the first time that night, he appeared less like a federal agent managing documents and more like a man racing against time. "We have located Sandra Kroll," he announced. Every head in the room swiveled. "Where?" Evelyn inquired. Not her directly, her image. A traffic camera captured a dark SUV crossing Halsted Street 22 minutes after her phone went offline. The license plates were traced back to a leasing company connected to Bell Judicial Strategies. Emily Ross was already rising to her feet, so they apprehended her. Mercer nodded once. "It appears so." Maya felt the tension in the room intensify around the word. And around midnight, Sandra Kroll had been an accountant possessing a valuable memory. Now, she was evidence that someone within Whitmore's inner circle believed that paper alone would not shield them. Evelyn made the first move. "Who is leading the operation?" "The FBI field office is mobilizing. A discreet team. No overt actions yet." "Good. What do we know about Kroll?" Mercer placed a file on the table and opened it. Mid-level financial administrator, 46 years old. Divorced, lives alone. No prior offenses. She managed contract compliance for Bell-affiliated entities. Signed off on reimbursement sequencing, vendor certifications, and consulting disbursement summaries. If anyone outside the family structure was privy to the actual flow of funds, it was her. Emily leaned over the file. Would she have retained copies? Mercer looked at her. "That is our hope." Maya spoke for the first time, not hoping, counting on it. The room fell silent for a moment. Evelyn regarded her daughter. Why? Maya's bandaged arm rested at her side. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes had regained their sharpness. Because individuals in positions like hers recognize when something is amiss before they grasp its inherent danger. The first time she encountered an amount that seemed incorrect, she likely told herself it was beyond her purview. The second time, she identified the pattern. By the third instance, she either resigned or she preserved evidence. Emily turned fully toward her. You believe she made backups? I believe that if she was frightened enough to vanish this quickly, she did not just begin feeling apprehensive tonight. No one contested this assertion. Mercer nodded. Her work terminal was remotely erased 30 minutes ago. Emily let out another muffled exclamation, but Mercer continued. The erasure failed on one external synchronization log. She connected a private storage device 3 times over the past 6 months. Evelyn's expression intensified. Locate the storage device. We are attempting to. The elder families in the waiting area had become progressively quieter as the night wore on. Some had been moved to an adjoining chamber where coffee and bottled water were finally provided. Others remained seated on the plastic chairs, their envelopes clutched in weary hands, reluctant to leave before dawn. They had endured years of waiting. A few more hours no longer felt like time that belonged to anyone else. Within the conference room, Mercer spread out a city map. A route had been marked from Sandra Kroll's apartment towards a warehouse district near the river, and then south towards an industrial block not far from the port. One phantom toll ping, he stated, pointing, then nothing. But Bell Judicial Strategies leased storage space 2 miles from here under a logistics subcontractor, Emily Fred. A data dump, perhaps a temporary holding site, perhaps both. Evelyn issued the order without hesitation. Move out. Mercer glanced at Maya, then back at Evelyn. Do you want her relocated before we proceed? Yes. Federal protection. No media attention. No standard transfer protocol. Maya straightened. I am not going anywhere blind. Evelyn's gaze shifted to her. This is not a negotiation. No, Maya replied quietly. But it is my case. It escalated beyond your case 2 hours ago. I understand that, Maya stated. That is precisely why I need to know what is unfolding. The words hung in the air. Not disrespectful, not emotional, simply truthful. Emily carefully broke the silence. She is correct on one point. Whitmore selected her because he believed she was isolated. If this is exposed as it should be, her testimony is crucial. Evelyn looked from Emily to Maya. Fatigue had not softened her, but something else had entered her expression now. Calculation overlaid with concern. You will be apprised of the situation, she said at last, not exposed. Maya nodded once. It was sufficient. 40 minutes later, a smaller team convened in a secure sub-basement room. Maya was not taken into the field, but Mercer kept a live update channel open under Evelyn's authorization. Emily remained as well, seated near the table with a yellow legal pad that she no longer pretended was for ordinary notes. The first update came from an FBI tactical lead just after 2 o'clock in the morning. Approaching the south entrance. Minimal external movement. 1 vehicle confirmed. The second arrived a minute later. Loading bay secured, then silence. Maya sat perfectly still, one hand gripping the edge of her chair. She could hear the faint static of the line, the subtle sounds of people breathing into headsets somewhere across the city. Then, we have 1 female conscious, restrained. Emily closed her eyes for a brief second. Mercer's voice came through afterwards, more strained than before. Confirm identity. A pause. Confirmed. Sandra Kroll. Maya exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. But the next words altered the atmosphere in the room. We also have boxes. Multiple file cartons labeled vendor compliance, training reimbursements, and judicial outreach. And there is a portable shredding unit operating in the rear. Evelyn stood, ordered it shut down, and preserve everything. Mercer rejoined the channel. "Ma'am, there is more. We discovered an encrypted drive taped to the underside of Kroll's desk drawer. She stated she kept it in case she ever needed leverage." Maya looked up sharply. Emily whispered, "You were correct." Maya did not respond. She was listening too intently. Sandra Kroll's statement was taken at the scene and relayed in fragments as agents moved her to safety. Her voice trembled, but the substance of her words remained firm. She confirmed that Bell Judicial Strategies was used as a conduit. She confirmed that Stuart Bell reviewed select fee packages. She confirmed that Caleb Bell managed procurement channels designed to obscure repeated judicial-linked transactions. And most critically, she confirmed that Judge Harold Whitmore was not merely aware of the system. He approved target profiles. Emily stared at the speakerphone. Target profiles. Kroll's voice came through the line, thin and reedy. Defendants least likely to contest. Low income, limited legal representation, no media risk. A significant number of black defendants. Because Bell stated they elicited less public sympathy and were easier to overwhelm with fee pressure. No one in the room moved. Maya felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. She had known. She had understood. But hearing it articulated in such stark language was different. It made the courtroom seem smaller in her memory, more deliberate, more corrupt. The line crackled again. "There is one more thing," Sandra Kroll stated. Mercer prompted her. "Go ahead." "I retained copies of internal audio transcriptions," she said. "Not complete recordings, draft transcriptions from meetings. One of them mentions your girl." Maya's fingers tightened on the chair. Evelyn's voice turned to steel. "Read it." Pages rustled on the other end. Then Kroll spoke, faltering once before continuing. Whitmore said, "Young, black, female, no visible support system, appearing sufficiently innocent to be symbolic, vulnerable enough to disappear. If we are going to make an example, let us make it a costly one." The room fell silent in a manner that did not feel like quiet. It felt like a profound impact. Emily looked at Maya, but Maya was now staring straight ahead. Her face drained of color. Her jaw was clenched so tightly it was painful to witness. Whitmore had not simply seen her and deemed her guilty. He had seen her and calculated her value. Evelyn remained silent for several seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and absolute. "Bring Kroll in. Seal every box. Freeze every associated account by sunrise. And from this moment forward, Judge Harold Whitmore is no longer a mere rumor cloaked in robes." Maya lifted her eyes. Then, for the first time since the judgment, the fear within her was no longer the dominant element in the room. Now, it had company. Now, it had confirmation. By 8:40 the following morning, the federal courthouse bore a different kind of silence within its walls. Not the usual hushed tones of procedure, where individuals lowered their voices because authority resided within the very structure. This was the silence that descends when too many people in one building anticipate a terrible revelation being voiced aloud. Courtroom 9A had been reassigned for an emergency evidentiary hearing. It was larger than Whitmore's courtroom, brighter, cleaner, and already filled to capacity. Reporters occupied the rear, their legal pads open. The families from the previous night filled 2 entire rows. Many of them were dressed in the same attire they had worn to the courthouse after dinner, their eyes red from lack of sleep. A retired pastor sat with his Bible closed on his lap. Laverne Fuller clutched her grocery envelope against her chest, as if it were a witness itself. Maya Williams sat beside Evelyn in the front row, no longer in county-issued attire. Someone had found her a dark blazer and a plain blouse. The bandage on her arm was concealed beneath her sleeve, but the bruise along her shoulder still ached with every subtle movement. She kept her back erect. She did not direct her gaze towards the empty defense table where Judge Harold Whitmore was expected to preside. Emily Ross stood with Daniel Mercer near the prosecution side, a stack of exhibits in her arms. She had not slept. No one of consequence had. At 8:47, the side door opened. Whitmore entered, clad in a dark suit instead of judicial robes. That alone altered the room's atmosphere. He appeared older than he had the day before, though not weaker. He still carried himself with the rigid dignity of a man who had spent decades mistaking intimidation for respect. But now, a strain was evident beneath the surface. His jaw was too taut, his eyes darted too quickly. Beside him sat retained counsel from a Chicago defense firm, a silver-haired attorney with expensive spectacles, and the expression of someone who understood that they had entered a room after the fire had already begun. The presiding judge, Eleanor Grant, took the bench precisely at 8:50. This hearing pertains to emergency evidentiary findings, preservation orders, allegations of judicial misconduct, and potential criminal financial activities linked to prior sentencing frameworks. She stated, "We will proceed with caution, but we will proceed." No one shifted. Mercer stood first. He moved without ostentation, placed the initial binder before him, and spoke in a voice so even that it allowed the facts to land with greater force. Over the past 12 hours, federal investigators have recovered documentary records, witness statements, financial routing materials, and corporate affiliations connecting discretionary court-imposed fees from multiple criminal cases to a private entity operating as the Whitmore Legal Consulting Fund. We will demonstrate that this fund functioned as a money laundering mechanism for funds extracted disproportionately from indigent defendants and black defendants through inflated judicial penalties. Whitmore's attorney rose immediately. Objection to the characterization. Judge Grant did not look at him. You may register your objection after the evidence has been presented. Mercer continued. He introduced the first exhibits: charts, vendor pathways, board minutes, payment transfers, shell contracts, then the familial connections: Stuart Bell, Caleb Bell, Bell judicial strategies, procurement approvals, reimbursement schedules, repeated intersections with Whitmore's sentencing appendices. Each page peeled away another layer of separation. Emily handed Mercer the next file. He opened it, then looked towards the bench. The prosecution also presents a witness statement from Sandra Kroll, a financial administrator formerly associated with Bell entities. Recovered by federal agents early this morning from an off-site industrial property where records destruction was in progress. The room stirred. Whitmore's attorney stood again. We request immediate review of the chain of custody and any coercion conditions. You will receive it, Judge Grant stated. Sit down. Mercer called Sandra Kroll to the stand. She entered, pale, visibly shaken, and under the protection of 2 agents. But she walked independently. When she took the stand, the entire room seemed to lean in. She corroborated the routing structure, the staged classifications, the fictitious consulting reimbursements, the method by which educational support and compliance training concealed funds drawn from defendants least capable of resistance. Then Mercer posed the question everyone had been anticipating. Did Judge Harold Whitmore have knowledge of how this system operated? Sandra Kroll swallowed. Yes. Did he approve of it? Yes. Whitmore's attorney rose. Objection. Overruled, Judge Grant stated. Mercer did not raise his voice. How do you know? Kroll glanced down at her hands briefly, then looked up again. Because he did not merely sign off on the fee structures. He commented on which defendants could bear them without political repercussions. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Mercer stepped closer. Explain that. Kroll's voice trembled, but the words held firm. There were internal meetings, sometimes in person, sometimes via transcript following phone calls. Judge Whitmore discussed risk, media exposure risk, appeal risk, familial risk. He stated that some defendants were easier to overwhelm than others. Mercer paused. What did he mean by easier? Kroll looked briefly towards Maya, then away. He meant poor, he meant unknown, he meant black, a significant portion of the time. No one breathed. Whitmore's attorney objected again, more forcefully now, but Judge Grant silenced him with a single sentence. Sit down, counselor. The court is listening. Mercer reached for the final marked exhibit. Did you preserve, Miss Kroll? Did you preserve any internal transcription materials involving the defendant, Maya Williams? Yes. Read the passage. Kroll unfolded the page with trembling fingers. When she spoke, her voice was thin, but every word resonated. Whitmore stated, young, black, female, no visible support system, appearing sufficiently innocent to be symbolic, vulnerable enough to disappear. If we are going to make an example, let us make it a costly one. A sound broke somewhere in the gallery. Not a scream. A low, pained sound from one of the older women in the second row. Maya did not move. Her face had become still in that dangerous manner. Emily now recognized it. Not numb, not defeated, controlled so tightly that the underlying pain became visible only in the set of her jaw. Mercer allowed the silence to linger for one full beat before introducing the next evidence packet. Fee comparisons categorized by race and income bracket. Cases flagged by pattern, original notices from families. Payment slips carried in envelopes for years. One by one, the paper trail ceased to appear administrative and began to look monstrous. Whitmore's lawyer finally stood and uttered the words that men like him invariably spoke when the situation was already lost. My client was operating within a challenging judicial environment. At worst, this may indicate a lapse in ethical boundaries and an aggressive exercise of discretion, not criminal conspiracy. That was the first moment Judge Grant looked directly at Harold Whitmore. A challenging judicial environment, she repeated. Is that what we are currently referring to as the monetization and targeting of impoverished and black defendants? Whitmore remained silent. His lawyer began again, but then Emily Ross stood. It was unplanned. Mercer turned towards her, surprised, but did not stop her. She held a single sheet of paper in her hand. Your Honor, I prosecuted cases in Judge Whitmore's courtroom. I signed documents that I should have scrutinized more closely. I observed him penalize individuals and labeled it as discipline because the institution referred to it as discipline. But what transpired with Maya Williams was not an unfavorable day in court. It was the precise moment the machinery ceased pretending to be justice. No one interrupted her. Emily looked towards the gallery, at the families, at the envelopes in their hands. Some people believe injustice arrives with violence and sirens, she stated. Sometimes it arrives as a sentence, sometimes as a bill, sometimes as a judge who has learned precisely how much cruelty official language can conceal. By the time she sat down, Whitmore was no longer looking at the bench. He was gazing at the table before him, where his own hands were clasped so tightly they could not conceal their trembling. Judge Grant reviewed the final pages in silence. Then she lifted her eyes. Based on the evidence presented, this court orders the immediate freezing of all assets associated with the Whitmore Legal Consulting Fund and all affiliated Bell-controlled entities. A formal accusation was documented. Appendices detailing prior sentencing connected to discretionary penalty increases were to be maintained, examined, and verified. Judge Harold Whitmore was immediately relieved of all judicial duties, pending the filing of formal accusations, and subsequently taken into federal detention. That specific instance marked a palpable shift in the atmosphere of the room. It wasn't due to any outward expression of jubilation, as no cheers erupted. Instead, it stemmed from the expectation that individuals like Whitmore would typically depart courtrooms through private exits, maintaining their composure. However, 2 federal officers stepped forward and requested he stand. For a fleeting moment, he remained immobile. Then, he rose, with a noticeable slowness compared to his demeanor on the bench the previous day. The entire assembly observed as the man who had deemed Maya expendable was escorted away from the defense table and led out under escort. Mia's gaze followed him only until he passed the second row of attendees. Subsequently, she lowered her eyes to her own hands. The previous day, her hands had quivered because he held her destiny. Today, they were still. The apprehension hadn't vanished, but it no longer solely occupied her thoughts. As Harold Whitmore disappeared through the side exit, taken into federal custody, a profound stillness settled over Courtroom 9, lasting for several moments. The ensuing silence didn't feel hollow. It felt merited. Then, a collective sigh of relief swept through the room. It wasn't an expression of triumph, not yet. The families seated in the gallery had endured too many years of accumulated paperwork, too many nights consumed by worry, too many partial payment reminders, and an overwhelming number of unanswered communications to mistakenly believe a single hearing signified the conclusion of their struggles. Nevertheless, something had undeniably shifted. The individual who had presided from the bench, projecting an air of ownership over the fates of impoverished individuals and black families, had just been escorted out under guard, in full view of the very people he had impacted, such as Laverne Fuller. This development alone verged on the unbelievable. Maya remained seated beside her mother as the room gradually began to regain its usual activity. Journalists hurried towards the exits. Court officers relayed information via their radios. A clergyman in the second row bowed his head, resting a weathered hand upon the cover of his Bible. Emily Ross stood motionless near the council table, her hand still gripping the back of her chair, as if the proceedings had concluded with a speed her body was unaccustomed to processing. Then, Laverne stood. She did so gradually, with the deliberate stiffness of a woman who had spent years navigating hardship without drawing undue attention to her suffering. She turned, not towards the exits, but towards Maya. "My grandson's name was Andre Fuller," she stated. The room hushed once more. Maya rose. Laverne withdrew a folded receipt from her envelope and held it up with trembling fingers. "This one," she said, looking down at it. "I paid this using money I had set aside for my funeral. That judge never truly saw any of us. He saw figures, cases, bills." Her voice grew thick with emotion. "But today, he saw someone looking back." Maya hesitated, unsure of how to respond to Laverne immediately. Others began to stand as well. Louis Harper in his tan overcoat. Claudette Shaw from Bronzeville, one hand clutching her purse strap. The retired bus driver with his shoulders stooped. The widow who had divested herself of her husband's old tools. They stood not as a unified group, but as individuals, each bearing personal wounds that had finally found public acknowledgement. Evelyn Williams stepped back slightly, allowing the moment to be fully for them. "Miss Williams," Louis Harper began, his voice low and weary. "They would have suppressed this had it happened to just one of us. They nearly did. Do not let anyone tell you that what transpired in there this morning was insignificant." Maya looked at him, then at the others. "It doesn't feel insignificant." "No," Claudette affirmed quietly. "It feels overdue." That sentiment resonated more profoundly than anything else that had been said. Overdue. Overdue for the men still burdened by fictitious fees. Overdue for the mothers who had passed away, while safeguarding receipts in church envelopes. Overdue for the fathers who had refinanced their homes, sold their tools, worked extended shifts, only to be informed that a balance still remained. Overdue for every family that had mistaken official letterhead for veracity, because no one had ever informed them that the law could mask Skirple as a con artist. Emily then traversed the room, more slowly than before, and stopped near Maya. Her face was etched with exhaustion. "I have drafted preliminary review requests," she informed Evelyn. "Emergency reviews for every flagged sentencing package. Some can be immediately suspended, others will necessitate hearings." Evelyn nodded. "File them all," she instructed. Emily cast a glance at Maya. "More names are coming in." "How many?" Maya inquired. Emily offered a look of weariness and helplessness that suggested the court clerks had been compelled to establish a secondary intake desk. Beyond the courtroom, the hallway had transformed into a torrent of individuals, documents, and hushed conversations. Federal agents were stationed at both ends. Clerks bustled past, carrying sealed archive boxes. On a bench positioned beneath the tall courthouse windows, an elderly gentleman sat with his hat resting in his hands, gazing at a pile of notices as if seeing them for the very first time. One of Mercer's agents approached Evelyn with a folder. "Ma'am," he said, "we have commenced the initial review phase. 14 cases feature language pertaining to enhanced fees. 3 include active collection orders. 2 defendants remain in custody." "Names?" Evelyn inquired. He opened the file. Andre Fuller, Denise Warren, Jerome Pike. Laverne drew nearer the instant she heard her grandson's name. "What does active signify?" she asked. The agent deferred to Evelyn. She responded herself. "It signifies that we can proceed." Laverne's hand instinctively flew to her mouth. Not everyone wept in such moments. Older individuals often responded differently at first. They became still. They retreated inward. They scrutinized the words for any hint of weakness before entrusting them. Laverne stood rooted to the spot, her eyes wide, her chest barely moving, as if hope itself had become perilous due to disuse. Maya observed her and recalled the previous evening. The holding room, the untouched sandwich, the blood drying beneath the gauze, the document on which Whitmore had quantified her existence as a monetary obligation. Yesterday, she had been merely a named subject to a judge's decree. Today, she stood in a courthouse corridor while another woman awaited news on whether her grandson might return home. This was the outcome the hearing had facilitated. Not vengeance, but restitution. Daniel Mercer joined them, carrying another folder and an expression that conveyed the morning's events had already outpaced the allotted time. The financial freeze is holding. Bell Judicial Strategies is paralyzed. The fund is also frozen. Stuart Bell's attorney has been calling every 10 minutes. "Let him call," Evelyn responded. Mercer nearly smiled. "We have also identified 3 defendants whose fees continued to accrue even while they were incarcerated." Claudette Shaw emitted a small, choked laugh. "I informed them of that," she stated. "I told them, how can you oversee an individual who is already behind locked doors?" She shook her head. No one listened. Emily turned to her. "We are listening now?" Claudette met her gaze. "Then write it down, correct?" There was no anger in her words, which made them even more potent. Emily nodded once. "I will." A marshal approached discreetly and informed Evelyn that a secure room had been prepared for family consultations and case evaluations. She began directing individuals there in small groups. No grandstanding, no pronouncements, simply the subsequent actions, names, signatures, preservation directives, legal prioritization, the actual labor. The kind that genuinely alters a life if it is seen through to completion. Before Laverne followed the marshal, she paused before Maya once more. "Are you still in pain?" she inquired, glancing at Maya's arm. Maya offered a slight nod. Laverne looked at the concealed bandage beneath the sleeve of the blazer. "Good," she said. Maya blinked. "Good. So, you remember?" Laverne asked. "Not just him, all of us." Then she departed. The impact of those words lingered with Maya long after the hallway had emptied. Approaching noon, following 3 additional interviews and 2 emergency filings, Maya finally settled into a side room, a paper cup of coffee, now cold, cradled in her hands. Evelyn entered a minute later, closed the door, and placed a slim packet on the table. "First review set," she announced. "The court is considering immediate relief in 6 cases." Maya looked up. 6 for now. Maya stared at the packet, not opening it. "That's insufficient." "No," Evelyn agreed. "It isn't, but it is tangible." "Yes." For a brief period, silence settled between them. Then Maya spoke, her voice barely audible. "Yesterday, I believed he was ending my life." Evelyn sat opposite her. "Yesterday, he thought he was." Maya's gaze fell upon the packet, upon the names contained within, upon the genesis of something that still felt too delicate to label as justice. The law deprived these individuals of years, she stated, and half of them likely believed their names would never be spoken again. Evelyn's expression softened, though only subtly. Then speak them. Maya lifted the packet and opened it to the first page. Beyond the door, the courthouse continued its ceaseless activity. Files, voices, footsteps, directives. But within that small room, with the lingering bitterness of cold coffee in the air and sunlight finely piercing the high windows, Maya began to read the names of the individuals whom Judge Harold Whitmore had attempted to reduce to mere statistics. And for the first time since the pronouncement of the sentence, that felt like the inception of something more potent than mere survival. 3 weeks later, the initial disbursement arrived in an unadorned white envelope, its unassuming appearance belying the significance of its contents. Laverne Fuller opened it at her kitchen table, beneath a warm, yellow glow that had borne witness to her long hours spent settling accounts. This was the same table where she had meticulously organized church envelopes, overdue notices, collection demands, and the courthouse receipts she had preserved, folded within a grocery bag, due to a deeply ingrained belief that someone, at some point, might request to see them. Outside, Chicago lay shrouded in the nascent chill of early winter, and the radiator emitted a rhythmic clicking sound, like an elderly gentleman clearing his throat. Inside the envelope was a court order, not another demand, not another threat, not another balance statement, but an order vacating the enhanced fee assessments imposed on Andre Fuller under Harold Whitmore's sentencing framework, pending a comprehensive review of the underlying judgment. A subsequent page declared that all collection activities had been immediately suspended. A third page outlined the procedures for reclaiming funds unlawfully extorted through arbitrary penalties. Laverne read the opening sentence twice, then a third time. Her hand began to tremble. Across the city, similar envelopes were reaching other kitchen tables, delivered to widows, to fathers, to individuals who had grown accustomed to deferring the opening of official correspondence until they were seated. One man received notification that the compliance charges that had hounded his son for 4 years had been rescinded. A woman in Bronzeville learned that the so-called supervision fees applied to her grandson's case had never been lawful from the outset. A retired bus driver stared at his letter for 10 minutes before contacting his daughter, his own eyes unable to confirm its contents. The courthouse had not undergone a miraculous transformation into a sanctuary of righteousness overnight. It had not been transmuted into an emblem of compassion. Buildings do not experience repentance. Individuals do, or they refuse to. But the legal apparatus had finally been compelled to formally acknowledge in writing what so many families had intuitively understood for years. The burden imposed upon them had not been justice. It had been larceny disguised in official regalia. Maya Williams stood at the window of a temporary office on the 12th floor of the federal building, perusing copies of those initial relief orders as they emerged from the printer. The laceration on her arm had finally been properly sutured. The contusion along her shoulder had faded from a deep purple to a yellowish hue. However, the lingering impact of the sentence remained lodged somewhere within her, no longer manifesting as fear, but as a memory with sharp edges. Life imprisonment without parole. She could still recall the palpable weight of those words, still feel the collective holding of breath within the courtroom, still envision Whitmore's hand as he discarded the file. There were moments, typically when the building fell into a hushed stillness, when her body reacted before her mind could comprehend. The tremor in her breath, the ingrained instinct to brace herself, the sudden surge of heat behind her ribs. Trauma doesn't simply dissipate with the arrival of truth. It persists and requires the learning of new responses. Behind her, Emily Ross entered, carrying another stack of reviewed files. She appeared different now, not transformed into an emblem of innocence. That would have been disingenuous, but stripped down to something more authentic, less polished, and considerably more impactful. "We have 9 more for emergency reconsideration," Emily stated. 2 are probable vacates by tomorrow, pending the hearing judge's signature. Maya turned from the window. And Andre Fuller? Emily's countenance softened. Release processing commenced an hour ago. Maya closed her eyes briefly. That one held significance in a way I cannot fully articulate. Perhaps because Laverne Fuller was the first woman to stand by her in that waiting room. Perhaps because certain narratives transcend their individual circumstances when one person's suffering offers timely aid to another. Emily placed the files on the table. Reporters are outside inquiring if you will address the briefing. Maya almost laughed. 3 weeks ago, no one in that building considered me worth listening to. Emily offered a small, weary smile. That building was mistaken about many things. Maya gazed back out at the city. Cars flowed below in languid afternoon lines. Somewhere west of the river, families were opening envelopes with hands that had learned not to anticipate favorable news from the legal system. Somewhere within federal custody, Harold Whitmore was no longer dictating the course of anyone's remaining life. Stuart Bell and Caleb Bell had both been indicted. The fund had been frozen. The trail of documentation continued to expand. Yet, despite all of this, the most profound aspect of the narrative wasn't attributable to his culpability. It was the reclamation of identities. Later that evening, at a community law center on the South Side, the inaugural public forum took place. The setting was modest. Folding chairs, urns of coffee, a table laden with store-bought cookies untouched at the back. Fluorescent lighting overhead. Coats draped over chairbacks. Men and women in work attire sat alongside retired educators, clergy, law students, and families clutching folders thick with personal histories. Evelyn Williams stood near the side wall, eschewing a podium. She had resisted transforming the event into a celebration of victory, acknowledging that the accumulated damage was too profound for such an approach. However, there was a necessity for bearing witness, for articulating the experience, for creating a moment where those most grievously harmed could hear, clearly and publicly, that what had befallen them would not be again obscured by procedural complexities. When Maya was invited to speak, the room fell silent in that particular way that signifies a collective readiness to receive difficult truths. She stood with one hand resting lightly on the edge of the lectern. Her mother's inherent discipline was evident in her posture. Her own lingering pain was palpable in her expression before she began. They believed that incarceration would silence individuals like me, she stated, and no one moved. What they relied upon, Maya continued, was not merely fear. It was exhaustion. It was the bureaucratic labyrinth. It was shame. It was the conviction that if they employed enough official jargon, ordinary people would cease to trust their own perceptions. An elderly gentleman in the second row lowered his head. Maya's voice remained calm, yet it resonated with authority. I learned something in that courtroom. A sentence can attempt to obliterate a life. Debt can try to erase a family, and silence aids both in their destructive work. But silence is not equivalent to dignity. Dignity finds its voice when necessary. She then surveyed the room, her gaze directed first not at the students, but at the older men and women who had arrived with envelopes, receipts, and years of accumulated grief meticulously folded into manila folders. The law is not sacred simply because a judge declares it so, she stated. It is sacred only when it actively protects those possessing the least power within the room. At the back, Laverne Fuller rose first, followed by Louis Harper, then Claude Shaw, and subsequently others, their movements slow and deliberate. Imbued with the measured grace of individuals who had spent decades learning the harsh lesson of not expecting their country to champion their cause. One by one, they stood regardless. Evelyn watched from the periphery, her arms folded, her eyes bright yet steady. Emily stood near the wall, a notebook in her hand, not jotting down a single word. She simply observed. That evening, before the room began to disperse, Evelyn and Maya affixed their signatures to the initial charter documents for the Williams Justice Initiative. Its objective was straightforward to articulate, yet profoundly challenging to implement. To scrutinize predatory sentencing practices, to contest unlawful court-imposed debts, to advocate for the vulnerable before they are exploited for profit, and to ensure that the next individual subjected to the ordeal of a courtroom similar to Maya's would not face it alone. When the applause eventually commenced, it was not vociferous. It didn't need to be. It sounded like something rarer than mere triumph. It sounded like the voices of people who had been overlooked for far too long, finally hearing that the truth had returned to champion their cause. This narrative serves as a poignant reminder that injustice does not always manifest through overt acts of violence or overt chaos. At times, it dons the guise of authority, conceals itself behind legalistic terminology, and targets those perceived as the most vulnerable to suppression. Its most profound underlying message is that truth, inherent dignity, and unwavering courage retain their significance, particularly when the established system has been corrupted by prejudice, avarice, and the abuse of power. The story also powerfully illustrates how silence can inadvertently shield corruption. However, when ordinary individuals find their voices, diligently preserve their records, and stand in solidarity, even the most seemingly unassailable figures can be brought to account. Ultimately, the central message is unequivocal. Justice is only truly realized when it extends protection to the vulnerable, not when it serves the interests of the powerful. This video is a fictional work created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and circumstances depicted are not real and do not represent any actual individuals or true occurrences. The content is intended solely for the purpose of storytelling and emotional resonance.
In the end, the truth always comes out.